محمد وآل محمد صلوات. Brothers and sisters, we'd like to begin the program with the recitation of the Holy Qur'an by Dr. Mandana Imami. Please can we welcome her with a loud salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يريدون ليطفئوا نور الله بأفواههم والله متم نوره ولو كره الكافرون. والذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. هل أدلكم على تجارة تنجيكم من عذاب أليم. تؤمنون بالله ورسوله وتجاهدون في سبيل الله يا هل أدلكم على تجارة تنجيكم من عذاب أليم. تؤمنون بالله ورسوله وتجاهدون في سبيل الله بأموالكم وأنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون يغفر لكم ذنوبكم ويدخلكم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ومساكن طيبة جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ومساكن طيبة في جنات عدن ذلك الفوز العظيم وأخرى تحبونها نصر من الله وفتح قريب وأخرى تحبونها نصر من الله وفتح قريب وأخرى تحبونها نصر من الله وفتح قريب وبشر المؤمنين صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mandana, for that beautiful recitation. Brothers and sisters, tonight we are fortunate to have Dr. Amina Inloes, who will be concluding her 5-part series on environmental ethics in Islam. Please can we welcome her with a loud salawat. Dr. Amina Inloes is an American scholar, researcher, translator, and author. She is the author of Women in Shi'ism, Ancient Stories, Modern Ideologies, and also a co-translator of Spiritual Mysteries and Ethical Secrets by Fayd Kashani, as well as a contributor to the Tafsir al-Mizan translation project. Please can we welcome her with another loud salawat.
Thank you, and just a bit of advertising on that point. Through the efforts of the Tawheed Institute, especially Brother Ali Khalfan in Australia and all of the donors, all of the translators, the editors, ulama, etc., who worked on Tafsir al-Mizan, it is almost entirely translated into English. I think there's something like one surah in progress. Much of it is uploaded online, and the rest is available as ebooks or print books. I'm just saying this because a lot of people worldwide don't know that it is available, but it is in my view, the most prominent modern tafsir. And definitely it is a mine of information on the Holy Qur'an. So please do avail yourself of the resource if it is of interest. So let's have a salawat for all the people who really pushed that project forward. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب النجاة الأمة غريب مظلوم كربلاء يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز فوزا عظيما. Yeah, there's no limit to salawat. The angels multiply the salawat and do salawat on the Prophet and the mu'mineen and so forth. Karbala is on our mind. Let us see what we can find from the lives of Hussein's men who wrote the truth with a bloody pen. In our heart there lies a scar carved in by Ali Akbar, young indeed, but there was the need for the wrath of a lion heart and of Abbas. What can we say? Look at his body at the end of the day, bloodied and cleaved. Now perceive the faith of a soldier who truly believed. Hur the free was able to see the clarity of the Imam's plea. He switched his side and changed the tide and rushed to his death with battle pride. There's Habib, wishing to be the first cut down by the enemy. His loyalty was completely for the son of Imam Ali. Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana lihada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار والفلك التي تجري في البحر بما ينفع الناس وما أنزل الله من السماء من ماء فأحيا به الأرض بعد موتها وبث فيها من كل كل دابة وتصريف الرياح والسحاب المسخر بين السماء والأرض لآيات لقوم يعقلون. In the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the variation of the night and the day, and the ships that run upon the sea, with what benefits humankind. And the water God sends down from the sky, whereby he revives the earth after its death, scattering all manner of beast therein. And the shifting of winds and the clouds subdued between the sky and the earth are signs for a people who understand. Sadaqallahu al-Ali al-Azim. The past few nights we have been discussing what the Islamic tradition, worldview, scripture, Qur'an and hadith, ethical tradition, and so forth has to contribute to making a healthier planet and a healthier world, both in terms of how we humans treat each other and also the health of the land. The past couple nights we were talking about things that are very tangible, things we interact with on a daily basis, food and clothing. Today I would like to close with some reflections that are more abstract. However, because I know this is a qawm yaqilun, this is a people with a good aqil, that this shouldn't be a problem. But I would like to discuss something a bit more abstract that we don't always discuss. In fact, quite frankly, I don't think I've ever heard it discussed in any religious circles, although it may be and I just haven't heard it. But that does definitely pertain to the way that the politics of how we deal with the environment manifests in society, and that is the topic of ideology. Yes, I know you weren't expecting that. Yesterday you were expecting meat, but today you weren't expecting ideology. And in particular, I would like just to look at what is the difference between faith and ideology, and how are ideologies thrown around. Because the modern era is the era of a marketplace of ideologies. There are a lot of competing isms out there. There's nationalism, I think communism's kind of fallen off the market these days, but there's capitalism, there's feminism, there is socialism, there is etc., Islamism, Salafism, and there is also environmental isms. So there are many ideologies that are put around, and environmentalism is already an ideology that we interact with, for better or for worse. I'm not saying all ideologies are bad. I'm saying these are things that we should use our aql and our intellect and think about. But I think it will probably be one of the most significant ideologies in the next century. If you look at the past century, the 20th century, now we can look back at it in hindsight, it was a time when some of the ideologies that we're dealing with were some of the economic ideologies I mentioned. Gender issues took center stage. That's evolved into a different sort of gender discussion right now. But I do think these things will probably evolve to a couple main questions. One of them being ideologies centering around humans and artificial intelligence, if we continue to have the resources to produce that, and ideologies regarding the environment. So because this is something that we will probably be seeing more and more of, it's good to think about this and to think about what is the difference between an ideology versus faith, especially because it has been observed by some people that many Muslims in this day and age have a tendency to reduce iman, or to reduce faith, to an ideology. And not everyone. And I do think in general this happens less among the Shi'i community, and I understand we may have a plurality of people from backgrounds here, but I'm just saying it simply happens a bit less because some of our customs, which include the remembrance of Imam Hussein, are difficult to maintain in a sort of shallow manner. They do require a bit of depth, and there are other groups that have that too. But nonetheless, many Muslims do worldwide reduce Islam to an ideology, and that in turn tends to make it a bit less powerful, less good for the human being, a bit more shallow. So what are ideologies compared to faith or belief? Now, apparently they talk about ideologies in A-levels these days, so some of you might actually have a better answer for that than me. But nonetheless, just a few thoughts about what I'm intending here. Faith in general is associated with the age-old quest for wisdom and truth. It is a process, just like I was talking yesterday about the process of being a follower of Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them. Faith is not just you say a few words and that's it. Allah in the Holy Qur'an, brings that up. Allah says, don't say you're mu'mineen, say you're muslimin. The Muslim is the person who at least cedes to the Prophet, if you will. They acknowledge and confess to the truth of the Prophet and the existence of Allah. But faith is something that takes some time, usually for most people. Of course, some people, they're more open to it from a very young age. But nonetheless, there's a certain amount of depth, exploring, and consideration. And this can either be intellectual exploration, so for example, thinking rationally about the existence of God, thinking rationally about why is there suffering in earth when God exists, and so forth. And for some people, it may be more of an experiential thing, knowing God through the inner eye and the inner senses and so forth. But nonetheless, in contrast, ideologies do tend to be shallow and slogan-based. And sometimes these slogans don't make any sense. They might have some truth to them, but they don't necessarily cover the whole experience. More to the point, ideological stances are oftentimes used to divide people into groups, to split people against each other. I really hate to bring up politics in another country that I happen to be from, but it's just such a good example. Unfortunately, the social justice ideology, which I would say is definitely in line with Islam, and I would be completely behind, has sort of divided the population. There's sort of half of the people who are very much for it, and half of the people who are against it, and there's other dividing lines, here too, rural, urban, and so forth. But the point is, it's become a battle of two ideologies, and sometimes the actual real issues get lost. Sometimes ideologies are also used to discourage thinking about things and are used to control people. Politicians use ideologies. And when it comes to the environment, the reality is the mass media and the social media take stances that are intended to influence, dominate, and control people. Now, of course, it would be ideal if this is all sincere and from the heart. For example, we hear about wildfires or whatever the situation is, drought, heat, because people are genuinely concerned and they want other people to respond to that. But we do know that politics being politics, it's not always sincere. There might be some manipulation behind it, or sometimes with the media and social media, it's also sensationalism. Either they want you to watch them, or people on social media want you to give them likes, and the likes give them money, and so forth. So it's good to be cognizant of how these ideologies are being deployed, and then we can actually choose rationally how we will respond to them, not to be manipulated. I hate to bring up this example, but we do recall that fairly recently, during the pandemic, for example, there was a tremendous fear that spread among a lot of people. And to be honest, I don't think I've personally ever seen that much fear ever. And I know some of you come from places where there's been civil war and so forth, and I don't know how the fear compares. I would say I was living in Iraq when ISIS invaded, and the level of fear when ISIS invaded was far less than I saw people being scared of each other in everyday life during the pandemic in the places that I was. I remember once I saw a woman, she was like this far away from me, and she was terrified that I'm going to come close to her. And I do understand, it was a disease, we took precautions, but the fear was something else. And it doesn't help. Fear is beneficial insofar as it alerts us to a danger. So when we are afraid about what's going to happen to the planet, it's an alert that we need to do something. When we see, for example, temperatures that we really haven't seen before in some places, in addition to being sympathetic or helping out if we can, it's a danger sign and a warning sign to do something. But just living in constant fear is something that is neither socially healthy nor personally healthy. In fact, it tends to turn people against each other. A lot of violence, for example, is fear-based. And from an Islamic perspective, the mu'min fears Allah. That's the ideal. The believer, the faithful person, fears Allah only. Imam Hussein, he wasn't afraid of this person in the army or that person or, what will happen if they cut off the water or something. It's not like they weren't suffering, but it also wouldn't have been beneficial to be afraid of the things that are already there. Instead, the discomfort we feel should try to spark us, again, to use the intellect and to go towards action, whereas fear tends to paralyze the intellect. Now, I do understand that's an ideal. I'm certainly not at the level where I'm not afraid of anything else in the universe except Allah, but it's good to try to strive for that, and if we do get to a situation where there is collective fear or panic, which it could happen for any number of reasons. The only thing about the future, which really tends to be guaranteed, is things happen that we don't expect, or they happen the way we don't expect them to happen. To sort of stay calm and remember Allah's hand is above all things, and we try to respond intellectually and rationally, if you will. So this is something to take into consideration. There's a couple of quotes from Imam Ali, peace be upon him, on this topic. And keep in mind that, just when it comes to basic climate and environment, the environment he was living in, we know, was incredibly harsh, and they didn't have all the stuff nowadays. It's not like Mecca and Medina, they had air conditioner or they had cars or, these things that make life a little bit easier for people who have them in the region today. But, like the rest of the people there, he was dealing with the harshness of the environment around him. And he mentions, if you fear the difficulty of a situation, be hard and firm in front of it, and it will become less difficult for you. And this is interesting. Wittingly deceive the problems of the age, and they will become easy for you. So again, I'm not suggesting we put our heads in the sand and we ignore what's going on. That was definitely not the theme of the past few days. But just that sometimes we need to stand firm in front of what we are facing. Similarly, it's related, he said, that when we are afraid of something, jump straight into it, because the intensity of your fear is worse than what you fear. Fear is worse than fear. Fear is worse. The quotation. The fear is worse than what you're actually fearing. Salawat. And again, I'm not saying there isn't a serious situation to be concerned with, but just if we look at the past century, for example, a couple generations ago, people were terrified of nuclear war, and that's definitely a very serious fear. That's presently, the worst immediate catastrophe we could do to ourselves that would cause mass suffering, God forbid. And while I do think this generation, and I don't mean in this room, but I just mean the youth outside, maybe because of the games they play and stuff that have this sort of weaponry in them, they don't always feel the seriousness of it the way I think people did a little bit before. Nonetheless, it affected a generation who thought they're going to die immediately because there's going to be a nuclear war. And, thank God it didn't happen. And now I know some of this generation is becoming a bit frightened or sort of maybe not even thinking so much about their future and so forth because they're not sure what's going to happen to the planet. And again, I understand the fear, but we also have to have hope in our lives. And, as human beings, we have adapted for a long time. And people have gone through tremendous things in the past, and we will adapt. Many of us do come from communities which have adapted to many things. And, alhamdulillah, Islam is adaptable too, and it does provide a solid structure for society to survive difficulties. And so that is definitely one of the advantages traditional religion has. One of the ideologies that is quite common in the present era that most of us interact with a lot is sometimes referred to as scientism. That is to say, taking science as a sort of religion or God. Now, when we look at the Islamic heritage, there is a vibrant tradition of science. We have a lot of scientific contributions, past and present, not only in the classical era, even up to the modern era. There were a lot of interesting things being developed by Muslim scientists, and they're just not usually mentioned because that's when Europe tended to become a little bit more scientifically ascendant. So we don't have a problem with science. But among Muslims, classically, science was seen as part of the overall metaphysical picture, discovering the signs of Allah. Appreciating the creation of Allah, like in the ayah that I mentioned, pondering on the signs of Allah as the Holy Qur'an invites us to do. But the ideology that's been driving global secular culture is empirical science, and that's it. So sometimes, for example, traditional religion is devalued because it's not measurables. I can't presently at least to go to a laboratory and measure the soul or measure Allah or measure the angels and so forth. That said, that viewpoint is a little bit skewed, even though it's quite popular in some atheist circles, because you can, in fact, measure the impact of religion on people and society. You can measure the psychological benefits, for example, of prayer and being in a religious community. As I was alluding to, the sort of main, Islam, for example, and a number of other religions, they do add a sort of cohesion and stability to society that allow it to weather things in a way that societies that lack these things, don't necessarily have that stability in the face of chaos. It's very easy for someone to be individualistic, secular, materialistic, nihilistic, etc., when they have a reasonable amount of prosperity. But if there's a famine or something, that's really going to fall apart very quickly. So there are definitely measurable ways in which religion has and does help us and will continue in the future, including in the face of the environmental perspective. But it's also worth considering that this ideology, as I was mentioning on the first day, it does affect conceptions of the earth. So not only does it, unfortunately, has it led to an abuse of the earth, but also there's a belief, in the predominantly, I'm not going to say everyone, but predominantly in the global scientific culture, that the earth is like a blank slate, and we do things to it, and because it's inanimate, it's all in our hands, basically. And there's certainly no reason why that is certain. I mean, if one considers design, argument from design, that Allah is the designer, it could be quite as simple as Allah has designed the earth, to have sort of safety mechanisms, if you will. And if we start to do things that we're not supposed to be doing, certain safety mechanisms will kick in. Nature sometimes tends to be underrated. And, there's other things too, the Gaia hypothesis and so forth. But I'm not trying to, promote any model. But I'm just saying the entirely material model may not necessarily reflect what will happen. And if that is the case, that it's not just the case that, the earth is like a piece of paper that I, sit here and hold nicely or I tear apart, but it actually does have some safeguards, that would be an optimistic thing in the future. So those are a few thoughts on ideologies, and in particular environmentalism, because again, I do think these are emerging. This is emerging as the main ideological market that will characterize us in the future, and it's important to think about that. And the Holy Qur'an is always telling us to think. Is there a single ayah of the Qur'an that tells you don't think? Just blindly copy what someone is doing? No, it's always telling you to observe, to think, to consider, and to deepen your knowledge and understanding. So, I know that was a bit abstract, but I understand there's people in here who study Mullah Sadra and Ibn Arabi, so that's not nearly as abstract. But it is worth considering, and it's also worth considering with respect to how we see our faith. Some people might be at the ideology stage where they just take Islam as, maybe slogans like Islam is peace, or I don't know, whatever their slogan is. And that's a starting point, but it's good to move on a bit from that, because at the end of the day, ideologies don't tend to hold people in times of difficulty, but a deep faith will. So now I'd like to close with a few thoughts on what might be our way forward as human beings, and in particular, what we might have to offer as Muslims. And what I think is most likely, if we are able to get past these growing pains in our history as a human species, and get past this crisis point, I think it will probably take a mix of tradition and technology. There are some people who just call to tradition, let's do things the old-fashioned way, let's all have homesteads, and so on and so forth. And sometimes that can feel nice because it's nostalgic. We tend to look at the past and often think the past was better. We idealize it, and we don't think about the horrible things that were going on. This is probably something very graphic that will remain in your minds, but I was looking at some medieval death statistics for London, and there were quite a number of people in the medieval era who died being eaten by worms. And I was thinking, well, alhamdulillah, at least we don't have that here anymore. We might think about these times, and life was so much simpler and so forth. But they had their problems then, we have our problems now. But there are definitely good things we have in our tradition, and some of them are technological. If you think about all the ways people manage to keep their food cool and preserve it over time in the desert, the things they use to make the house cool. We've lost some of these technologies in the modern era just because of oil and oil money and so forth, and there's an over-reliance on air conditioning, a reliance on cars in some places and so forth. But these technologies are still available, that they're used in some places. And there is more attention nowadays to looking at how did people do things before we had all these fossil fuels, and that is one way of addressing the problem. However, I do think that as people, we've also changed too much as a globe to just go back to a quote-unquote traditional society, and we do need to keep progressing technologically as well. So that might be, for example, energy sources, that aren't polluting, that, we're not dumping nuclear waste, we're not burning fossil fuels, but things that are sustainable and renewable and healthy. And indeed, this just might be a growing phase. And that might be your job. I mean, that could literally be some of your jobs in here, doing research in that era. But I do think those are the two main tracks that will probably help us. And the same thing with, other things too, how we interact in society, how we do things. In some ways, tradition is good because usually what's traditional survives because it does have a sort of, it's worked, even if it didn't work perfectly. But there are also changes in the world in our time that are different from the past, and that's okay, and we can embrace those as well. These, of course, are sort of theoretical issues, and most likely our ulama will be addressing this more. I mean, there is writing on it now, there is discussion on it now, although I still think, by and large, the Muslim majority world has been so preoccupied with, very immediate concerns like warfare, for example, unfortunately, that sometimes we can't quite get to all these things, but it is definitely a topic of increasing interest. So we will see how that goes as well. And, it is quite possible, or indeed it's not just possible, it's glaringly obvious that, society will have to change. And either we will change it ourselves or circumstances will force it to change. But it's good to be optimistic that sometimes it changes for the better. In our time, there have been things, that have been advances, that have been, we can say they've been good and healthy for society. There's more awareness about certain matters of social justice and, inclusion and so forth. There's more education. Even the amount of Islamic knowledge has really multiplied just over my own lifetime. The things we hear people saying who are, say, 18 or 20 years old was, sometimes, just the things you heard people who were quite learned say in the past. So society will change because circumstances are changing, but maybe that will be for the better, because as much as some things have gone right in our time, there are many things that have gone wrong and are going wrong. I have really appreciated the community talks the past couple of days talking about what's been going on in Palestine, and I know many ulama are speaking about it this year. That's one of the many things that has not gone right in our time. So inshallah, we can have a better world. And again, as I said before, the believer is optimistic and Allah treats us as we hope. This is narration that, if we expect that things will go badly, Allah will unfold it and make it go badly. But if we have hope in Allah and trust in Allah, and we do our bit, we're not like trashing the planet and then saying, no, I have trust in Allah. But we do our bit and we have trust in Allah, then Allah treats us according to our expectations of Him, because Allah is too compassionate to disappoint His servants. So, with that in mind, I would actually like to take us back over 1,000 years. Speaking of tradition and things that have survived from the older times. And I would just like to pause and reflect on one of the famous poets of Ahl Bayt, peace be upon him, who you may be familiar with, especially because he's been in some of those history movies and so forth. That being the very well-known poet Bid al-Khuzai, who was a companion of Imam Raza and Imam Kazim, peace be upon them, and also had the opportunity to see Imam Jawad, peace be upon him. And he's a very interesting person when you look at his history. Sometimes we just read his poems, but we don't necessarily think about him. It's said that one of his ancestors came from Africa and was there in the Prophet's time, so he was one of the Sahaba. And the Prophet saw him, and he prayed that Allah would bless this man's children. And indeed, the family was very blessed with both poets and narrators of the narrations of the Prophet and Ahl Bayt, peace be upon them. Dibbel, as you may know, was also a very fierce critic of the Abbasid caliphs, who he saw as usurpers of the position of Ahl Bayt, peace be upon them, to the point that he was often on the run. Because, of course, if you go to someone who has the seat of power and you're making fun of them or saying they shouldn't be in power, you oftentimes have to get out of town very quickly. But he kept doing that until, once the caliph felt he went too far and he was killed for his criticism of the caliphates. There is a very famous poem of his that is quite long. I'll just mention a few lines of it that he presented to Imam Raza, peace be upon him, about the suffering of Ahl Bayt, peace be upon them. And this is a poem we still hear today in Majalis, in the shrine of Imam Hussein, peace be upon him. Perhaps because it is still very, very touching and very present. And it said that he refused to tell this poem to anyone before he went to Imam Raza and presented it to him. And this is part of what he said. "O Fatima, had you seen Hussein fallen? فاطم لو خلت الحسين مجندرا." O Fatima, had you seen Hussein fallen? وقد مات عطشانا بشط فراتي. Lifeless, thirsty, by the shore of the flowing Furat. إذا للطمت الخند فاطم عنده. Oh, Fatima, you would have struck your cheeks in anguish beside him. وأجريت دمع العين في الوجنات. Tears would have been streaming down your face. فاطم قومي يا بنة الخير واندبي. Rise, Fatima, daughter of divine grace, rise and mourn. نجوم السماوات بأرض فناتي. Mourn the stars of the heavens, fallen in this desert land. قبور بكوفان وأخرى بطيبة. Some graves in Kufa, others in Medina. وأخرى بفخر نالها صلواتي. And others in Fakh, hallowed by my prayers. So which of these stars from the heavens shall we remember tonight? One of those great shuhada was someone we know very well, one of the oldest shuhada in Karbala, a man who saw great change in the world around him during his life, Habib ibn Muzahir. Some sources say that he was a companion of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was a boy at the time. And once he and his father were walking down the street when the Prophet suddenly calls out to this boy, Habib, and then he comes and embraces him. His father, of course, he was very honored, but he asked why. And the Prophet said that one day your Habib will come and help my little boy Hussein. This Habib ibn Muzahir was a man to be reckoned with. He was a very powerful warrior and was one of the members of the elite special forces of Imam Ali, the Shortat al-Khamis, who had sworn their lives absolutely to protect Imam Ali and were his closest companions. And so he spent much of his adulthood in service of Imam Ali, but he had still not yet fulfilled this prediction that he would go and serve Hussein. Habib ibn Muzahir was a hafiz of Qur'an. It is said he used to spend the night reciting the Holy Qur'an and in worship, but still, he had not reached the point where he had come to help Hussein. It's said that Imam Ali taught Habib ibn Muzahir and a few other special companions some secret knowledge known as al-Manaya wal-Baraya, the knowledge of calamities to come, the knowledge of how people will pass away. But still, he had not yet come to serve and help Hussein. At this point, he had grown old, and certainly a man of this age would be excused from battle. It said that he was so old that his face was so wrinkled that the skin would hang down over his eyes. So when he was on a horse, he had to tie back his skin. That's how old he was. And still, this had not yet come to pass. He had not yet come to help Hussein. Many people in Kufa wrote to Imam Hussein, begging him to come and save them from the tyrannical Ibn Ziyad. But Imam Hussein is said to have written to Habib and told Habib, his childhood friend, that now it is time to come. Now it is time to come and help me. It is said that when he received this letter, he began to cry. Imagine getting this letter from someone you know so long ago, let alone the grandson of the Prophet. His wife said, Habib, why are you crying? He said, this is a letter from Hussein, this boy I knew in my childhood, the grandson of the Prophet, calling me to aid him. So she tells him, get up, go. This is your time. You have to go and help Hussein now. But it was not easy. Ibn Ziyad had locked down Kufa. And so Habib ibn Mazahir and Muslim ibn Awsaja crept out of Kufa. They snuck out of Kufa under the darkness of night. They hid during the day, and at night they used to work their way around Ibn Ziyad's spies and agents until at last they came to Imam Hussein on the 7th of the month of Muharram. When Habib arrived, he saw that Imam Hussein had already made camp in their final resting place. He began to approach slowly. When the companions, some of them recognized him, they began to call out, "This is Habib ibn Mazahir. This is the companion of Rasulullah." They embraced him, they welcomed him. Imagine what a bright light that must have been to see a familiar face, to see a supporter in the face of so many enemies. When Zainab, peace be upon her, who had also been a little girl at the time of Habib, heard that he was there, she sent him her salam as well. At that, he began to cry, and he said, "Who am I? Who am I that Zainab, the granddaughter of Rasulullah, should be sending her salams to me?" And as Ashura drew near, Sayyidah Zainab called out to some of the companions, "O beloved companions of my brother, look after him, look after Hussein. Do not leave my Hussein alone." And Habib ibn Mazahir was one of the loyal companions who swore that they would never leave Imam Hussein. And thus Habib ibn Mazahir was one of the strongest supports for Imam Hussein. We know that when Muslim ibn Awsaja fell in the desert of Karbala, Habib and Imam Hussein went to his body. Habib looks at Muslim. He says, "I see now. You are leaving us. You are going to paradise. Do you have any last words for me?" Muslim ibn Awsaja says, "Look after this man. Look after Hussein." Habib says, "I will do this until my last breath." And he did. The time came for him to ask the Imam for permission to fight. The Imam never pushed his companions to fight. He says, "Habib, you're not young anymore. You were a friend of my grandfather. You supported my father Ali. You supported Imam Hassan. You've always been there for us. You don't need to fight anymore. Go home, live the rest of your life." Habib ibn Mazahir says, "No, my life is for you, Aba Abdullah. I spent my whole life in support of the Prophet and Islam and his family. I cannot leave you now. How could I live with myself, Aba Abdullah, if I were to leave you now?" And so he rode out to the battlefield. The enemy were amazed at how this old man was fighting. 62 of the enemy fell by his sword, until a man came and struck him on his head. His helmet cleaved apart, and blood began to gush from his head. And he fell down and called out, "Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah." Imam Hussein rushed toward this faithful companion. He began to wipe the tears and blood from him. He embraced him one more time. And in his final moments, however, Imam Hussein would call for Habib again. By then, almost all the men had fallen. The old men had fallen. The youth had fallen. Even the infant soldier Ali Asghar had fallen at the hands of the enemies. Imam Hussein had buried Ali Asghar in a shallow grave. Rabab was crying over the loss of her son. The Imam was standing there, surrounded by enemies in the desert alone. The Imam Hussein looks at the bodies of his companions. He says, "O Habib ibn Mudahir, O Zuhair ibn Qayn, O Muslim ibn Awsaja, O strong warriors, why don't you hear my call? I am calling you, but you do not respond. You are sleeping. Wake up, defend these women, defend these children, defend the family of Rasulullah." Habib was such a strong supporter of Imam Hussein that Imam Hussein remembered him to the very end. But not only did the enemy kill all of those people, they mutilated their bodies, severed their heads, and raised them on spears. And one of the heads they raised on a spear was the head of Habib ibn Mudahir. And as the caravan was brought from Kufa to Damascus, The women, children, Imam Sajjad were paraded around along with the heads of their loved ones on spears. Every time they looked up, they saw a father, they saw a brother, they saw a son. When all of a sudden a young boy saw one of the heads that were being paraded down the street, and he began to scream. He kept following it and looking at it. The people said, "What's wrong with you? What are you doing?" He said, "Please have mercy on me. On that spear is the head of my father. That is my father, Habib ibn Madahir al-Asadi." And of course, that was before the final tragedy, when the young daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salam saw the head of her father brought to her on a tray. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إلهنا وسيدنا تقبل أعمالنا. O Allah, accept our amal. Ishfi mardana. Heal all those who are sick. Irham amwatana. Have mercy on those who have passed away. Iqdi hawaijana. Accept our hajat. Ikshif humumana. Relieve us from our sorrows and distress. La tusallit alayna man la yarhamna. Do not set upon us someone who would not have mercy upon us. وَمَنْ كَانَ فِي مَجْلِسِنَا هَذَا طَالِبَ الْحَاجَةِ فَاقْضِ حَاجَتَهُ يَا Allah. O Allah, if anyone here has any hajat, accept their hajat. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات رحم الله من يقرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amina, for that and very informative talk today. Just a reminder that we will extended Q&A session tonight with Dr. Amina after Salah for the conclusion of her 5-part talks on environmental ethics in Islam. Further, tomorrow we will be having Sheikh Ali Raza Kaki, who will be beginning his 5-part series on going through Muharram. We'll now move on to the next part of the talk of the program, which will be spoken word by Zia Delji. Please, can we welcome him with a loud salawat?
Brothers, sisters, elders, and respected scholars, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before I begin reading my poem, I just thought I'd introduce you to why I wrote this poem and what I want you to get from this poem. So every poem that I write, there is a goal behind it. So the poem that I've written now, I've titled Karbala Senses, with reference to our 5 senses. And I believe that our senses are closely intertwined with our nafs, our soul. So the purpose of this poem is, whilst I'm reciting it, inshallah, to take your nafs and your soul as close to Karbala as possible. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Karbala senses. Sense number 1, hearing. O Ali Akbar, I hear your eloquent voice reciting the adhan, calling God's name, a voice so beautiful it even shook the enemy's attack. A voice so beautiful it even shook the enemy's attack. Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must have loved your voice so much that soon after you called upon him, he called you back. That soon after you called upon him, he called you back. O Sakina, I hear you crying. The heat of Karbala means that your lips are drying. But luckily for you, Sakina, your uncle Abbas will never stop trying. For even when they cut his arms and his legs beneath, Hazrat Abbas still clenched that water between his teeth. Look at the selflessness and the love that Hazrat Abbas had for his niece Sakina. O Abbas, never have I heard a silence louder than the initial sound. A sense of helplessness as you and the alam fell to the ground. As you called out to your Mawla and your brother Hussein, who dropped to the floor, there was a gentle sound which closed the gate of this dunya and opened up Jannah's door. As you called out to Hussein, who dropped to the floor, there was a gentle sound which closed the gate of this dunya and opened up Jannah's door. So that was hearing. Sense number 2, taste. O Hazrat Qasim, only the foolish ask if on Ashura Imam Hussein tasted defeat. Only the foolish ask if on Ashura Imam Hussein tasted defeat, so I lead them to what you said, O Qasim. Where dying for Hussein actually tastes like honey so sweet. Where dying for Hussein actually tastes like honey so sweet. From someone so young, yet so wise, O Qasim, I would expect nothing less. For Qasim, you are right. For the hunger to fight for Hussein is satisfied with the taste of success. So which success am I talking about? The success in this dunya is not the wealth we accumulate, but rather our mountain of good deeds, which will set us in good stead for the akhirah. This is the success. For Qasim, you are right. For the hunger to fight for Hussein is satisfied with the taste of success. For this success, Qasim, is what makes you stand out from the rest. Your ability to answer Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's call to his hardest of tests. For this success, Qasim, is what makes you stand out from the rest. Your ability to answer Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's call to his hardest of tests. That was taste. Sense number 3, smell. O Karbala, I smell the blood of your shaheed, which smells so pure. For any blood that is shed battling for the freedom, for the dynasty of Hussein is so pure. Led by the one named after freedom himself, O Hur. Led by the one named after freedom himself, O Hur. For pure also is the blood between two loving brothers, where the selflessness is there that they fight for each other. O Hussein, we heard you cry, Hal min nasi yansuruna. O Hussein, we heard you cry, am I alone? But at least your nephew Muhammad could fight beside his brother own. But at least your nephew Muhammad could fight beside his brother own. And so for my nose it is the best cure to go to the plains of Karbala and smell this blood so pure. That was sense number 3, smell. Sense number 4, touch. Oh Hussein, I don't even want to imagine how touching a 6-month-old blood can feel. For even the angels had had enough, and so down came Jibra'il. For even the angels had had enough, and so down came Jibra'il to pluck Ali Askar's blood from the sky. From Karbala's skies to Karbala's plains, my hand burns feeling Karbala's plains, yet my hand still yearns to feel Karbala's plains. As I beat my chest in martyrdom, I feel Karbala's pains. As I beat my chest in martyrdom, I feel Karbala's pains. As I feel the tears rolling, each drop that touches the skin is for you, O Hussein. As I feel the tears rolling, each drop that touches the skin is for you, O Hussein. So now moving on to the last sense, which is sight. For those of you who are aware and bright, you'll be wondering when there is so much to see, oh Zia, why have you kept it brief with sight? For Zia, they exclaim, on the day of Ashura, there was a lot to see. But like Bibi Zainab, I say, I saw nothing but beauty. But like Bibi Zainab, I say, I saw nothing but beauty. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Please, thank you very much, Zia Delji. That was beautiful. We'll now move on to the Marshiya recited by Abbas Ali Miraj. Please, can we welcome him with a loud salawat?
Please can I have one more loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. حسین الغریب الغریب الحسین حسین الشہید شہید الحسین حسین الغریب الغریب الحسین حسین الشہید شہید. Salams on the head of my Mawla Hussein. Salams on the lips of the blessed Hussein. For days in the desert your body remained. With thousands of arrows your shroud they became. And on Arba'in where the millions will pray, the grief and the mourning for you, Ya Hussein. Hussein al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Hussein Hussein al-Shaheed al-Shaheed. The screams of the children thirsty for water, the duty was sent to Abbas, our Savior. The Lion of God could be seen riding faster to reach Al-Furat and to please his Sakina. But how does he fall from the horse with no hands? The flag of Islam laying bare on the sand. Hussein al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Hussein Hussein al-Shaheed al-Shaheed. A lady was seen peering out from the tent, a cry from the heavens that Zahra presents. Oh shimmer, why on his chest the sword stained in blood was Hussein's final test. Hussein, to your mother, it's time to ascend. Your trials in Karbala have come to an end. Hussein al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Hussein Hussein al-Shaheed al-Shaheed. Sakina would cry every night for her father and Zainab would cradle Hussein's little daughter. But when they presented his head on a platter, Sakina could not bear to live any longer. But no one could comfort or soothe young Sakina. She died in the prison with Zainab beside her. Hussein al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Hussein, Hussein al-Shaheed al-Shaheed. The fire, the burning, the tents up in flames. O Zainab, protect Imam Ali bin Hussein. The soldiers of Yazid want to beat us with chains. The women and children are crying in vain. Oh Baba Ali, please come back and defend us. Your children are waiting for you to return. Hussein al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Hussein, Hussein al-Shaheed al-Shaheed al-Hussein, Hussein al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Hussein, Hussein al-Shaheed al-Shaheed al-Hussein. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Matam Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. Where were you, Ali? Where were you, Hassan? When the armies met and the fighting had begun? Where were you, Ali? Where were you, Hassan? When the armies met and the fighting had begun? The tears and the blood, the crying and the pain, dying in the sand, the army of Hussein. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. When Ali Akbar rode into the fray, with his mighty strength he kept the forward bay. When Ali Akbar rode into the fray, with his mighty strength he kept the forward bay. But then a cowardly blow struck him to the ground. In his father's arms martyrdom he found. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. Slicing through the foe to reach the river's edge, to fill Sakina's flask and carry out his pledge. Slicing through the foe to reach the river's edge, to fill Sakina's flask and carry out his pledge. The arrows raining down struck a fatal blow. Standard of Islam came crashing to the floor. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima. When Imam Hussein reached Abbas's side, he looked up to the sky with tears in his eyes. When Imam Hussein reached Abbas's side, he looked up to the sky with tears in his eyes. He held his brother's head in his loving arms, standing all alone in Karbala, Hussein. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, the children of Hussein crying through the night, the darkness and the flames, the terror and the fright. Children of Hussein crying through the night, the darkness and the flames, the terror and the fright. Who'll protect them now and fight the enemy? Zainab and Kulsum, the daughters of Ali. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima. How Sakina cried for her father's arms to guard her from the blows, the beating and the harm. How Sakina cried for her father's arms to guard her from the blows, the beating and the harm. The caravan has gone, but there's a little grave, all alone in Sham, the daughter of Hussein. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima. O my fourth Imam, in fetters and in chains, from Karbala to Sham, the lashes and the pain. O my fourth Imam, in fetters and in chains, from Karbala to Sham, the lashes and the pain. The patience and the prayers, the torture and the strain, the sacrifice supreme, Islam will live again. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave away his life. O Muhammad, come and see the sacrifice. Son of Fatima, he gave. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Brothers and sisters, please make preparations for Salah. Subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la ilaha illallah huwa Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله وسلم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله هيا على الصلاة هيا على الصلاة هيا على الفلاح هيا على الفلاح هيا على خير العمل هيا على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إني وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا وما أنا من المشركين الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد الله أكبر ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار رب صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى سمع الله لمن الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد بحول الله الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى سمع الله لمن الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية والفوز بالجنة والرزوان في دار السلام وجبار نبيك محمد عليه وآله السلام. اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
اللهم صل على الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. يا على الصلاة يا على الصلاة يا على الفلاح يا على الفلاح يا على خير العمل يا على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إني وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض حنيفا وما أنا من المشركين. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا آتيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده اللهم صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر حول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. رب صل على محمد وعلى محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى الله أكبر. حول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إنه ليس لي علم بموضع رزقي وإنما أطلبه بخطرات تخطر على قلبي فأجول في طلبه البلدان فأنا فيما أنا طالب كالحيران لا أدري أفي سهل هو أم في جبل أم في أرض أم في سماء أم في بر أم في بحر وعلى يدي من ومن قبل من ومن قد علمت عن علمه عندك وأسبابه بيدك وأنت الذي تقسمه بلطفك وتسببه برحمتك. اللهم فصل على محمد وآله واجعل يا رب رزقك لي واسعا ومطلبه سهلا ومأخذه قريبا ولا تعنني بطلب ما لم تقدر لي فيه رزقا فإنك غني عن عذابي وأنا فقير إلى رحمتك فصل على محمد وآله وجد على عبدك بفضلك إنك ذو فضل عظيم. Brothers and sisters, just to remind you, we will be having the extended Q&A session with Dr. Amina after Ziyara. And also, please remain seated once we're back between the partition for Tabarak as well. Thank you.
زيارة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذريته، علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا حجة بن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان، عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله تعالى مخرجه وظهوره. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله
Muhammad wa al Muhammad Salawat, brothers and sisters, please can I ask you all to take a seat as we get ready for the Q&A session. Muhammad wa al Muhammad Salawat. Muhammad wa al Muhammad Salawat. Brothers and sisters, we will now continue with the Q&A session with Dr. Amina. So I'll start on the sisters' side if there's any questions.
Hello, assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for your talk. Based on yesterday's one about what we eat, animals, looking after the animals, what's your opinion on the Hajj ritual where we're slaughtering so many sheep, and what's the solution, and is it done in a sustainable way? Is it done in a kind way? What's your thoughts on this? Thank you.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yeah, a hard question, as I was just saying to someone who just left. I'm going to sit here and say different varieties of I don't know, because if it's an easy question, either you know the answer, you ask Google or ChatGPT. So that leaves the questions we don't have answers to. I mean, it is part of the rituals, and I think there's two answers. And I do think in the future, fiqh in general among Muslims, and specifically among Shia, will bifurcate. And there will be a group of people who are, quite literal to the text and tradition, and they say, if this is how it was done in the 12th century, this is how we do it today, and never shall it change. And then there will be people who say, well, actually, we go for the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. We're seeing that, bit by bit nowadays, that there is this sort of split, and I think that's going to become more pronounced. And basically, I don't have an answer. I mean, yes, it's prescribed, but sort of having rivers of blood from sacrificed animals where the meat oftentimes is somewhat wasted, at least, although there's efforts to try to, preserve some of it and give it to those who are in need, is problematic and probably not something that the Prophet would have been happy with. I mean, the whole Hajj situation, of course, may be one of those issues we're going to have to think about. I'm sure a lot of us heard about the heat deaths this year during the Hajj, and that really hit me. I mean, not the least because it's, unfortunately, although we're all supposed to be brothers and sisters in Hajj and equal, realistically, the people who come from wealthier countries usually get a little bit better accommodation and services, and usually it's people who are from poorer countries or who are just poorer themselves who are, staying out there on the mountains or something, and who are going to be the ones who are, who are hit the most. Indeed, that's how climate change affects us in general as well. But we may have to do something, especially given that the Hijaz is one of the hottest places on earth and will probably just keep getting hotter, to sort of manage people and manage the Hajj and try to deal with the fact that we have an enormous population, many of whom are Muslims and naturally want to perform their wajib Hajj, and they should. I was thinking about this, when I heard about that, that we've always been very proud that the house of Allah has never been abandoned, war and invasions and, all of these things. But what do you do when the sun is your enemy? You can't fight that directly unless they really did some sort of massive infrastructure there, to handle that. So I know I'm getting a bit off topic, but I think in general, the way Hajj rituals are managed is going to have to be a big issue to deal with over the next century or two. And I mean, I think there's been just, having been there twice, and I know some of you have been there a lot more, it seems like there's a bit of improvement, but there's definitely still scope for improvement. So yeah, basically I think that's an issue, and that's how I think this is going to go. There's going to be people who's just going to hold to, this is what we do because that's what's written, and there's going to be some people who say we should do it a bit differently. And I don't know what is more preferable to Allah.
Any questions from the gent side?
There was a question from a brother online.
Oh, cool.
Why do you think that real faith or belief is so easily prey to ideologization? And do you suggest a litmus test that might be self-administered as to determine whether one's own faith is failing, or failing even to the level of ideology, and also at the level of the community?
Wow, someone was listening astutely online. I don't think people of genuine faith easily fall prey to ideology in the sense of ideological manipulation. Quite to the contrary, I think that a deep faith tends to bolster someone in the face of the currents of society. Politicians say one thing, or I don't know, social media says one thing, then they say something else, and they say something else. We've seen this throughout life. But if you have a solid spiritual development and ethical system, that helps you to try to find your way, inshallah, and Allah is the guide. I think people in general fall prey to ideology. If I may, we've gone from sheep in the sense of, zabiha to sheeple. Many people, unfortunately, they just want to be told. They don't want to think. The Qur'an is always telling us to think. We know that our most prominent book, Al-Kafi, what is the first chapter about? Come on, what is the first chapter about? Of Al-Kafi? No, it's not about faith. What? Wikala. No, it's not about Wikala. It's about the aql, it's about the intellect. So, this is incidentally one of the things the Sunni hadith books don't have. They don't have chapters and chapters on the intellect, but the first section of Al-Kafi is about the importance of the intellect and its role in faith. So, if you have the faith, you have the intellect, and I'm not talking about how many PhDs you have or something, but the sort of deeper intellect that leads you to truth, that leads you to Allah, and so forth. Right, so people in general fall prey to manipulation because a lot of people just want to be told what to do, or they have a sort of herd mentality that they do what everyone else is doing, or they just respond. And it's amazing how even social media is so manipulative. I confess that, sometimes I get tired and I've started scrolling mindlessly on the stuff that pops up on YouTube. And, it's not necessarily bad, but it's just mindless. Like, this is how I made my noodles today or something. So it's okay, it's Muharram. I'm not going to do that for right now. I don't need to be brainless. And it's as if it's trying harder and harder to find stuff that I'm going to click on, these newer things that are popping up that are more interesting. I'm like, no, I'm not touching that. And you can, throw whatever you want on my screen. But the point is, unfortunately, the masses are easy to manipulate. We've seen that in a lot of countries, in a lot of situations. I don't really need to name them, but even if you look at some of the anti-Muslim rhetoric or the fear of immigrants, that's just manipulation and fear. It has nothing to do with what Muslims or immigrants are doing, or the fear of halal meat. So it's a human problem, and it's also a modern problem. I'm not saying it didn't exist in the past, but it's been very much exacerbated in our time. You might have read the book, or to the brother online, you might have read the book, Science of the Cosmos, Science of the Soul by William Chittick. This is one of the few books in life, apart from Qur'an and hadith, that I would genuinely recommend because it's a very thoughtful book. Science of the Cosmos, Science of the Soul. Who here has read it? Okay, well, give it a try and see how it goes. His main idea is what aspects of traditional Islamic thought can be used to solve our modern problems, and also a bit of what's gone wrong with Islam in some ways in the modern world. One of the things is the ideologization of Islam. So you get a group like Daesh, for example. The way they turn into killing machines is, they get a very sort of simple set of slogans, if you will, set of beliefs, and that's it. There's no thinking, that there's no empathy, that there's no depth. So Islam is susceptible to this, like everything else. But he has an interesting observation that I have been chewing on, and now you will chew on it. He says that in the past, taqreed was only for the transmitted knowledge. Which is, the Shi'i view. So the big things, like Allah, the afterlife, the soul, we don't just follow those through taqreed. We follow the things that are the transmitted knowledge, say, through Qur'an and hadith, like how many rakat do you say in Salat, how do you do your wudu, and so forth, because that's something you're supposed to learn through transmission. But the big issues we are supposed to grapple with ourselves and not just, accept Allah exists because my grandma told me or something. My grandma did actually tell me that, by the way, way back when. But in any case, he points out that in modernity, in particular, the secular global culture has turned it around. That taqleed is done for the big issues. We're supposed to accept, and of course there's exceptions, but he's talking about the dominant voices. You're supposed to accept, for example, the worldview of the secular culture, and in particular, a heavily materialist worldview. You're supposed to accept views about the role of religion. You're supposed to accept views about what is the earth, or is the earth conscious, and so forth. And then for the secondary things, if you will, the quote-unquote laws, that's where people are encouraged to do their own taqleed, be different, be an individual, and so we're all running around, doing this and that and so forth, trying to be different from each other. But he points out that that's the wrong way around. And I do think that's a helpful observation, because if we do embrace the big questions, along ethical questions like was brought up just now, and so forth, that in and of itself does keeps us thinking. But if we don't, that is unfortunately a way of manipulating people. It can be political, it can be economic, it can be whatever. So yeah, I'll just shorten that by saying, I guess thinking is something that's recommended in the Qur'an and narrations, and is also tied into faith. But it's a good question.
Any questions from the sister's side? Or the brother's side?
There was a follow-up online as well. As for at the level of community, what are the practicable steps you might suggest we implement so that we move beyond sloganeering and shallowness of faith and so forth? And should it be a more top-down endeavor, or what do you suggest?
I think by and large, I'm qualifying that. As I mentioned, with respect to the 12-verse Shi'i branch of Islam, in general, a lot of our practices do bolster against that when done sincerely. That said, I'm sure most of us are aware of some times or places in recent history where 12-verse Shi'ism has been treated as a rather shallow ideology. And, the sloganeering has put people off because it doesn't always reflect people's realities, or people say things and don't do them. And, we understand what goes on in some places and how that's had a negative impact on the faith of the masses. So it does happen, even if it might have happened accidentally or by people who were sincere. And again, I think that just goes back to the situation of the modern world. It happens with a lot of things. So again, I think it just goes back to awareness. And, when we do see it, to acknowledge that's not the depth of Islam in the Qur'an, the hadith, the historical tradition. And we do have more. And sometimes to think about things. One of William Chittick's observations, maybe I'll leave you to William Chittick's observations when you read the book. I think it's chapter 5. But in any case, I'm still going to go back to that. And so I'll just leave it at that. And it doesn't mean there aren't places for slogans. Like if you're at a protest, that's how you express yourselves as a group with a single idea. But one thing that has been stated that I think is good to keep in mind is that revolutionaries eventually become reactionaries. If you have a revolution, it may be what's needed at the time, and it's an important movement in society. But if you just stay static and don't keep addressing what's going on, you end up becoming a reactionary because you're not progressing. You've become stagnant and not addressing the issues of the times. And I mean, I think sometimes some of us respect some of the great scholars of the mid-20th century. I mentioned some of them, Shahid Mutahari, for example, and they kind of freeze them, like they're like one of those Ice Age mummies you dig up nowadays. They just say he said this so that this is Islam and this is it, and they don't keep in mind that the world was quite different then. It's changed very rapidly since then, and if these people were still alive, they would be coming out with new things. And yes, some of what they said is still very much accurate and relevant. Unfortunately, we should have gotten past those issues, but it still is. But they also would have been coming up with new views and keeping up with the times, because that's what made them who they were. So yeah, avoiding stagnation is good too. And anyway.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amina Inloes, for your lectures over the last 5 nights and for your insights. Brothers and sisters, the MUHARRAM program this year.
One more question, is it okay?
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Doctor, for giving us a series of lectures on enlightening us on the general knowledge of environment and the surroundings. My question is, we've been blamed by our Sunni brothers that you Shia people are doing more importance to Muharram rather than Ramzan. How far you think is said now it has been getting more and more? And I have seen during my lifetime also, I wasn't so much aware of it in the sense, what is it now with the media, with WhatsApps and whatever, we are getting more and more knowledge every day. And I've been asked these questions, would you agree to that? And what is your opinion on that?
Do you mean what do I think we should focus on, or should we be concerned
about
what other people think?
They're saying that you are giving a lot of importance to Muharram compared to Ramadan, which is the month of fasting, and it's general for the Muslim people. But
I think that they are different things, and sometimes we have two beautiful things. Maybe I have a crystal flower that someone made, and exquisite artwork, and then I have an egg. Someone gave me an ostrich egg once from South Africa, and it was painted, and it had some gold paint. It had calligraphy of Ahl Bayt on it. They're very beautiful in their own way, but they're also different. And the month of Muharram, the month of Ramadan are different, except that fasting is actually recommended in the first few days of Muharram, not Ashura, of course. I think on the grounds that it makes you sometimes more sympathetic to Imam Hussein, or more emotional, or to be more spiritually focused. Not required, of course, but it is one of the things that's out there. But yeah, they're different things. The month of Ramadan is mentioned in the Holy Qur'an and has its merits and its spiritual position before Allah and spiritual reality and its customs. The month of Muharram has its customs. According to narrations, it was very much observed by the imams, and we're following in their footsteps. So I think other people sometimes just need to chill a little bit and stop getting too involved in what other people are doing, and just live and let live, as long as you're not doing something harmful or haram or whatever. Muslims, even forgetting other religious groups, there are a lot of different customs among various groups of Muslims. Sometimes they're cultural, or the Sufi groups have their customs, and then different countries have their customs, and they're doing their own thing to come close to Allah. So it's good to let them, and then they should also give us this space as well.
Are there any last questions? Thank you once again, Dr. Amina Inloes. Brothers and sisters, this month we're trying to raise £10,000 for to cover the cost of running our Muharram program. You can donate online at sikkim.org.uk or at the pay terminals on the gents and ladies side, or by speaking to one of the EC members. Registration for Husseini Madrasa is also open. To register, please visit husainimadrasa.org.uk. Thank you very much. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.